So yeah, good morning. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Dan May. I'm the commercial director here at ramsac, and I'm joined today by my colleague Adil Hussain, who is our lead SharePoint consultant here at ramsac, and is also suffering badly with hay fever today. So well done, Adil. You're powering on through. It's great to have so many people joining us today as we talk about SharePoint, and really what we want to do in the next sort of 45 minutes or so is take you on a bit of a journey of how you can get the most out of SharePoint. So a couple of things, there's been a real drive in the last couple of years, particularly sort of from pandemic onwards, towards the adoption of SharePoint. And there's various things that have driven that. The obvious thing being the desire to migrate to the cloud and the desire to switch off on-premise services. So for some people, you're already in SharePoint, but really you're using it as a glorified file server. And we certainly saw right at the beginning of the pandemic, when people were looking to enable remote working, we saw a whole load of people go, well, we just need to turn off this file server that's complicated for people to access externally. And they did what we sort of call a dirty lift and shift. They literally sort of copied a load of files, moved over and almost replicated what they previously had when they browsed to their H drive or whatever it was. They just lifted and shifted all that data and dumped it in SharePoint. And they're using SharePoint as a sort of a glorified file server, which is fine, but has its challenges. I think the other thing is more and more people are making use of Microsoft Business Premium licenses, and you're going to see a bit of a theme in webinars from ramsac over the next couple of months about how you get the most out of that investment, because Microsoft Office 365, in particular that Business Premium license, and any of the sort of the licenses where SharePoint is bundled in, there's so many tools available within the per user per month fee that you're probably already paying for. But we know that a lot of organizations aren't making full use of, and we've got a bit of a program coming over the next few months to look at the various things that sort of are available to you as part of your existing license. Microsoft have this phrase about more for less, doing more for less, and what that means is there's loads of tools around productivity and collaboration that are available to you that you don't need to spend any more money on because it's already part of your subscription. So it's no wonder that when we put out the invite for this event, it's always a popular one. We ran this same event a couple of months ago and had about 80 people on the call. I can see there's about 60 people on the call today. So I think there's a real appetite for understanding more about SharePoint and the opportunities that it offers. So as I say, we're going to spend about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end as well, to say, regardless of where you are on your SharePoint journey, whether you haven't started it yet, whether you've done a lift and shift, whether you've done a little bit of work, but you're not quite happy with it, what we want to do is take you on a bit of a journey through some of the issues that we commonly see. So as I mentioned, really delighted to be joined by Adil today. Adil's been with ramsac for about 3 years now, I think, Adil, about that?
Yeah, coming up
as
to
our,
that, yeah.
as our lead SharePoint consultant. And he has one really, really difficult client out of all of the clients that he looks after on our behalf. Who's your most difficult client, Adil?
ramsac.
Definitely ramsac. So the first project we gave Adil to do when he came to us was to look at ramsac's own use of SharePoint. So we're going to share quite openly our SharePoint site today as the best tool that as an example. And we think it's useful. What we're trying to do today is be quite practical, so actually show you what we're talking about. There's loads of jargon that we can use, and Adil's got a little fine box next to him. Every time he uses a bit of jargon, I'll interrupt him and he has to put a pound in the box. But we're going to take you on a bit of a journey. Adil, I think we were going to start just by bringing up we call it the hub. Because all good intranets need a bit of branding. So I think you were going to bring up the hub. While Adil's doing that, feel free, if you've got questions as we go, just to use the chat window, and I'll try and interrupt Adil at appropriate points with any questions as we go. Adil, we're going to go into this in much more detail. You're sharing the ramsac hub now, which is this is our SharePoint site, and this is our our intranet and our file storage and everything else. We're going to go into more detail over the next 45 minutes, but just to sort of head off some of those quick bits of jargon, do you want to give us a 60-second tour of how SharePoint is structured when it's presented in this format?
Yeah, so I'll be very quick with this. So straight off the bat, as you can see from here, this is our intranet site. So this is the landing page that everybody comes to, and then from here it will branch off to different areas. So each one of our departments has their own departmental site. On the back of this, they have a document library, but we'll get into those going forward. So we'll explain that a bit more in detail. We've also got two separate hubs as well. One's branded as our people hub, and one's branded as our marketing hub. The people hub is essentially everything to do with our people, HR things, but we will go into this in a bit more depth as well. And marketing, I think everyone can understand. It's just everything to do with marketing, where all of our logos, buttons, etc., and our templates are. And then it's all linked together with a global navigation, so you can get back to wherever you need to go quite easily and quite seamlessly.
And
Is that
this,
quick
I mean,
enough?
yeah, no, that's brilliant. And the project you started when you came to Ramsac, we still had an on-premise server. So
Yeah,
when we were working remotely, we were using VPNs and stuff to connect to that. We were obviously, as part of our cloud migration, we turned all of that off. So as well as being a lovely branded interactive site that aids our communication, this is also where every single document ever created in Ramsac now resides.
yeah.
And we're going to look at that and the implications of that, how we secure it, how we access it, how we navigate it as we go on. Brilliant. So Adil, I know let's start you off before your hay fever kind of completely takes over. Let's start you off with some questions. I've got a couple of questions that I've got. We had a couple of questions that were kind of pre-submitted, but I know that one of the things you do a lot of with our clients where they're already using SharePoint is you go in and you do a bit of a health check, don't you? You go
Yeah,
in and you audit the use of SharePoint and you look at what's working, what isn't working, where end users are making gripes and things they don't understand or don't like,
yeah.
and why things are perhaps running slow or insecure. So you've looked at dozens and dozens of SharePoint sites now for our clients. For you, what are the sort of the common issues when it comes to the way people have put SharePoint sites together?
So I think one of the main common things that I've come across is when you mentioned it earlier, actually, about a dirty lift and shift. So a lot of people, they want to get off their servers, get up to the cloud to promote that cloud working, and everything moves onto one SharePoint site. So in the beginning, everything's fine. So it's okay, continue to work that way. But then as it grows and grows and grows, these document libraries grow a bit more and more. And the issue that you have with this is then you have a view list threshold of 5,000 items per document library. So that comes into effect. Oh, I was muted then. Um,
Yeah, sorry, I think we all got muted. Yeah, Adele, if you just go back, sorry. So you were saying there's the document library, which is where people deposit all of their core documents.
yeah,
That you were saying, I think you cut off just at the point where you're saying there's a limit, isn't there, to sort of
yeah,
5,000 items.
yeah. There's a limit to that, to 5,000 items. A SharePoint document library can hold 30 million items, but the view threshold can only handle 5,000. So then that begins to grow. It becomes searching becomes an issue, and then also for any reason, if the SharePoint site was to go down for any maintenance or anything like that, the whole company would come to a stop. So my approach for it, and anyway, and best practices, is that data should be split into multiple sites by department or business function, which is what we've done here at Ramsac.
So so in our sort of brief overview of our site, you showed that the hub is like our sort of our homepage, if you like.
Yeah,
And then off of that, I mean, you showed two examples where we've got the people hub, which is all of our HR documents, the
yeah,
marketing hub, which is all of our marketing documents, and then we've got that our teams little menu there, and that drops off into like the finance team and the
yeah.
commercial team. So all of those are sort of separate SharePoint sort of subsites. Is that right?
Yeah, so they're separate SharePoint sites. They all sit on the same environment and they're all tied and linked in together. So if I just open the technical team one as a quick example, because obviously that's where I sit. So as you can see, it's got the same branding, and then it's just got some nice web parts here, which we can just quickly touch on, if that's all right. So we've just got organizational web part just to show everybody else outside of the technical team who sits here, and then all the links for daily resources. But then from the left-hand side, you can see here where it says technical team documents. So each team have their own department site with their own document library, and their files are stored away correctly, which takes the load off the whole environment. And I think it just makes browsing easier as well. From a user point of view, everybody knows where they need to go to find files as well. And it's just nicely stored out.
So, and I suppose that's kind of like if we go back to the old days where we had file servers, you kind of had your home drive, and then you might have had your finance drive and your marketing
Exactly.
drive, and people knew where to go. So I guess this is the sort of the SharePoint equivalent. So I can see in the browser there, I've got ramsac.sharepoint.com/tech team. So that's saying, well, if I'm in the tech team and I'm looking for a document that relates specifically to my job, that's probably where I'm going to find it. So I guess that makes it easier in terms of browsing and finding the files. But just going back to that point that you were saying about kind of the limitations of, whilst you can have millions of items technically in SharePoint, you can only see and search for the first 5,000. And I guess if you took all of our files across all of our departments and our clients and HR and finance, we got, I mean, there probably are millions of files, I'd imagine. So presumably breaking down your SharePoint site into these subsites by department, by team, by function, does that make it quicker as well? Does that mean when I'm searching for something, it's much quicker to get a response?
It is, because then the browser's not having to make a lot of requests to get in. So that's a pound in the jargon, I'd say, because that's a little bit of a jargon on there. But so then it's not having to search for a lot of requests. It doesn't have to bring back a lot of information. You're just going into a separate site, grabbing what you need and going back again. Whereas you just touched on it, if everything was on one site, it's trying to load millions of files and different data as well, different things. And everyone is also hitting the same site. So there's all that traffic as well. So you're limiting that risk by splitting it all out, and it's just a nice user experience then that I find anyway.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when you look at ours, it doesn't feel as though you've got to remember where you've got to go, because it's driven. I mean, this isn't like a file server anymore. This is just like browsing the website, isn't it? For me, if I'm looking, so end users find it easy to find information because everyone's familiar with using a web browser, which is effectively what SharePoint presents in. But breaking up. And I know we recently had a situation where we wanted to make quite significant changes to one part of our hub, didn't we? We really upgraded the HR hub. And I know at one point that meant sort of taking down what was online, and you were doing a load of work in the background. And I suppose the advantage there of everything being broken down into separate subsites was that, okay, people couldn't access HR for a day, but they could access everything else.
Exactly.
And presumably that's a problem then if you've put everything all in one place.
Yeah, that's what I touched on just about the maintenance side. So, excuse me, sorry, my chest is killing me. But in the sense of when you're browsing around, if one site does go down, yeah, you're right. That portion of the business, okay, fine. One day is a bit of a disturbance, but then everything else can continue to function as normal. Whereas if everything was on one place, then the whole thing will go down, and then it's a struggle for everyone.
Now, I know that as much as you love talking about document libraries and subsites, I know the thing that really gets you out of bed in the morning is branding. So let's, as you can see already, we've got, kind of, this is our SharePoint, the hub in front of you. Shall we talk about how you've used SharePoint to look more like an intranet? Because I know when you started with us, you had some pretty strong opinions on this, didn't you?
I mean, straight from the bat, Microsoft do give you an out-of-the-box solution. And I think that the out-of-the-box solution is okay. But I think for a corporate company like ramsac, especially when I joined, I'm not saying it because I work for the company, but it should speak volumes. It should be something, should be personal. And SharePoint allow us to do what you see on the screen. So I just think, well, why not? And I think that a nicely branded intranet as well, it gives the users a nice feel as well, as opposed to just hitting a blank white screen and just browsing around. And I think that branding is, for me, I think it's something that should be considered as part of everything else when it comes to a SharePoint project.
So I know when you worked on this site and when you work with other clients, actually you spend quite a lot of time with the sort of the internal marketing manager. I know you and Lou, our marketing manager, spent a bit of time putting this together to reflect colours and images and stuff like that. And I mean, you I know when you started and you did your induction, you had some sort of feedback around the amount of links and things that we'd shared, and that sort of informed your decisions here, didn't it?
Yeah, it did, and I mean, it was selfish point of view. I'll be honest. I mean, from induction, I was given quite a lot of hyperlinks and third-party systems, for example, CRM, HR, and where to find my wage slip. And I think it was a case of, well, I have to refer back to a document or save them in a favorites tab, and you've got millions and millions. And I just thought, well, why don't we just incorporate it into an intranet look and feel, which is what we've done here. So I mean, if I just click on our CRM, for example, takes me straight to it. And literally, I don't need to go anywhere else. And if I close it down, I can get back to it quite easily from the hub as well. Our HR systems are there and everything's just ease of. I think that's the whole point of why we did it. It's a home page for everyone to grab what they actually need for their day-to-day role.
Exactly. And so that's very much how we designed our hub. So if you just scroll up the screen for us again a minute, just at the top. So this is our sort of our news posts at the front. So our goal, one of the things that we wanted to do was really reduce the amount of internal emails that we sent. And we've trained, and we're going to talk about training on this call, but we've trained people in each team to be able to post here. So this is kind of I mean, this is kind of news and dispatches, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
Just, internal news articles with celebrating like Sabina's exam success, just a little announcement, information about internal movers, long service awards, an internal newsletter. I know we publish monthly sort of health and wellness newsletters that appear in here as well, but it's an easier way for people to digest news rather than having lots of internal emails. And the thing that I've liked about this as well is it's all there in history.
Yeah.
So again, as a new starter, when you've got that sort of quiet period in your first couple of weeks of induction, an all company email that was sent last month isn't in your inbox if you only started work with us today, but you can browse back. There you go. You've shown it. You can browse back and see all of the news that's been posted forever, really, can't you? And search for it. So it's a much easier way of people having access to information. And then, yeah, do you want to just show us perhaps the People Hub and how we laid that out?
Yeah, so this one's actually my favorite, and I'm not just saying that because you're on the call, Dan. I know you look after it as well, but the reason why is all of our information is here, and it was interesting. I did a demonstration to a client of this as well, and they said that they really loved the whole concept of what we've done. And so straight from here, you've got benefits, career, personal development, well-being, a who's who, and a useful information. Now, this stuff here would typically sit in a folder structure or a document library within SharePoint, which it still does, by the way. It still does here. But what we've done is we've brought it to life on the homepage. So if I click on benefits, so now you've got this little breakdown here, and then you come into here, this would be a document typically, but we've broken it into sections. And I think that you're just bringing it into life into SharePoint, and you've put in the corresponding documentation along with it. And it just means that everybody can find what they need much easier, get to the point of what they want to see, and then just go back to the People Hub and then continue to find what they want. So it's bringing a nice dynamic, interactive look and feel, as opposed to just saying, here's a folder, off you go, have a read of 20 files, for example.
Absolutely, and I know the feedback we get after induction is that people really like this. It's something they'll sit and they'll play and they'll read. We had PDFs explaining all of our different benefits, explaining health insurance, explaining the pension scheme, whatever. But people don't tend to spend a lot of time sat inside folders, do they? Whereas people will browse a website, and this feels much more like a website. Brilliant. Thanks, Adil.
No problem.
So we've talked a little bit about sort of the way we structure the site, breaking it down into sub-sites, putting some branding and making it feel like ours. And definitely, just showing that news post, I think it shows how SharePoint really has changed the way we communicate internally and the way people see information. And it, I don't know, it's just got a more modern feel to it, hasn't it? Like if we go into a news post, for example, we can have likes and comments and shares, and it's just much more familiar with how we all communicate outside of work. I mean, people coming into the workplace don't use email outside of work, do they? We're much more used to communicating via a more sort of social medium, which I think this has done. But of course, the other thing that Ramsac's always talking about is security.
Yeah.
And we can't sort of ignore security when it comes to SharePoint. If we go back to what predated SharePoint, which was file servers, they were quite easy for us to lock down access to, weren't they? You know, we hid file servers behind firewalls. We had strong password policies in place, and we had control, we hope, as to who could access those files and folders. If I have now lifted all of my company data and effectively made it available on the web, because I don't need a VPN to access our SharePoint site, I just need a web browser, there's some core security concerns that we need to think about, aren't there? Do you want to talk us through some of that?
Yeah. So I mean, if you got there's different ways you can manage the security when it comes to SharePoint. I mean, but my go-to way is by using Office 365 groups, so using domain groups and security groups, and trying your best to structure those by department. When you structure those by department, it makes it very easy to manage. So, for example, a new starter joins the organization, they've joined the technical team, for example, you put them into the group, they automatically now have access to wherever that technical team had access. Similar with the leaver, if somebody leaves a team, you just go to that team, pull that individual out of that team, and now the access is controlled everywhere. It's a very, very good way to do it. Um, and yeah, it just makes everything simple, even from an admin point of view as well.
And I think it's worth saying that obviously, you know, sort of we're not going to go into the detail of sort of 365 security today, but again, one of the big advantages of SharePoint is it is part of that 365 subscription and family. So if we're then in the background doing all of those other good things around how we're using Intune to control who can
Yeah.
access what on their mobile devices, how we're enforcing password policies and multi-factor authentication, then everything we're doing at an organizational level kind of layers on top of SharePoint. Would that be a fair way of describing it?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I should have touched on that in the sense of about MFA and things like that. They all work hand in hand. So you've got all this layer of protection that will help you keep secure. I think one misconception with SharePoint is a lot of people don't think it's just secure enough. I'm here to argue against that point. I think that SharePoint is very, very secure if you do it correctly and you do it right. Excuse me, because you can protect your files down to a folder level, a site level, even a file level to individual users in the organization. You can protect it as well, and then also with the external sharing. But I know we're going to get onto that.
Yeah, absolutely. But, you know, let's, you know, staying with that security point. I mean, again, this isn't a security webinar. This is very much a SharePoint webinar. But we kind of do have to address the fact that it is a risk only if it's not done properly. So again, if
Yeah,
you've done that dirty lift and shift of files and you just stuck it in a native sort of SharePoint out of the box setup, you haven't thought about security groups and who can access what files and folders, and you haven't thought about your 365 security, then you have just put your file server on the internet, haven't you?
yeah,
So I think that's where this is about. If you've done all of those other things that you should be doing, if we have put multi-factor authentication in place, and if we have put those kind of device control policies that, you know, and again, there's a whole other webinar we're going to run on Intune and the way we control who can use personal devices to access what information. I guess all of those security considerations do become even more important, don't they? Because if you haven't done anything right, if you're still just hiding behind an email address and a simple password, then effectively what you've done is you've just given access to everything, haven't you?
yeah.
So I think that's really important. And let's talk about external sharing, and then we'll talk about some of the security considerations of external sharing as well. So one of the big advantages of SharePoint is that ability to collaborate with people outside of your organization as well, you know, and all of us have got external stakeholders, whether that's, you know, whether we're a charity and we've got a board of trustees, whether that's working with clients, whether that's working with third parties. So talk to us a little bit about how we use SharePoint for sort of external sharing.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just what you've just said. So you can share all your files with external third party people, which is what we also do here at Ramsac. There's, I mean, in the way you want to structure it, there is no right or wrong, but there is, I would say, one of the best ways to do it is what we've done here, and that's to move all of your files that you know that should be shared externally to a separate SharePoint site, which is what we have. And then what you're doing here is you're configuring the site to say, yep, we've allowed our users to share this externally, but with some configuration items in place, such as link expiry and multi-factor authentication, verification code method to get into the file, etc., etc. But then we've locked all of our internal sites down that can't be shared externally, and no one can even get to it. So that's how you would pretty much do it. And I think that the other thing that I've come across quite a lot when people have done a dirty lift and shift is that the configuration setting by default is set to anyone, which means the whole SharePoint environment can be shared to anyone externally with no, limit in the link in the days of that or verification method, nothing at all. As long as you have a link to that file, you can continue on as long as you want. And it's part of my health check as well, which you touched on earlier in the call, that I check those settings. And there's a number of tenants that I've seen that are configured that way, and then that's when we get involved to try and rectify and bring that level of security to it.
Yeah, I think that's really shocking, isn't it? That there's behind the SharePoint, the bit that most people will never see on SharePoint is the sort of the admin control panels. And when you deploy Microsoft SharePoint out of the box, the
Yeah.
default setting is really permissive, isn't it? It really allows anybody to share anything. And as you say, it means that, if I've shared a link with you, that link is always valid and always available to anybody that has that link. Now you can lock that down, can't you? So ours is set down so I can only share externally with things that are in our external drive. But even then, I can only share them with somebody that has got a named account.
Yeah.
And I think what people forget is, if I have it on its most permissive setting, which is if you've got a hyperlink into this document, you can access it. That also means you can forward that hyperlink to anybody else. So actually, I have no control. So let's just say, I have shared a link with you, and that
I've
link
shared it
gets
on and then on.
exactly, and not necessarily deliberately, but it's in an email chain, and other people get added to that email chain, and then that email chain gets forwarded. That link just works for anybody out of the box, and that's really a big no-no from a sort of a data protection, data security point of view, isn't it? So I think that's I know when you do your SharePoint health check, looking at the sort of the global settings and the sharing permissions is really really a key focus for you, isn't it?
It is one of the, I think it's very important for me to always check that. I think that's the first thing I do every single time. And then, I mean, 9 times out of 10, it is that, the reason why I've been drafted into coming to do a health check is because the users want the best out of their SharePoint. We have a look at it, we see these problems, and we just talk about and rectify it. And then we always put that level of security, we explain to the client as well exactly what it means, what each option means, give them a breakdown, give them a demonstration as well sometimes to show what each method will do and what it would look like from the end user point of view. And then the client just choose what they feel is best for them. And then we train the users, which I know we're going to get onto training, but we train the rest of the organization of how to effectively share correctly as well. And then, yeah, it's a process, and just becomes very, very much easier for everyone else.
And the thing I like about the way you set it, this kind of, for us, we have this client's external, is I can't accidentally share the wrong things, can I? I can't.
No,
I
exactly.
know if it goes in here, then there's a risk that can be shared externally, but I'm not accidentally sharing HR, or I'm not accidentally sharing. And I think those permission groups that you talked about are really important as well. I know one of the things our cybersecurity team here talk about is that kind of that permission creep, where people get added to more and more and more, and rights never get taken away. So somebody joins you in your marketing team, and then they get moved into a different team, but that their rights don't get taken. Whereas because you move people into a permission group, you control what everybody in that group can and can't see. So I have all my HR and all my finance documents in SharePoint, for example, but 90% of the business can't see those things.
No, because
And
we've
indeed,
restricted them.
and I know indeed with our Secure Plus service, we can go one step further, can't we? And we can put alerts in place that say, well, if permissions change on a certain site or a certain set of folders, that alerts us as well. So if suddenly somebody new is given access to the HR folders, that can alert our cybersecurity team immediately. So we can really layer on quite sort of close monitoring of this. Any other sort of top security tips from you, Adil?
Yeah, I've got a few. So I've got, for example, locking your devices in the office as well. I mean, it's very important if you're getting up just to pop to the kitchen or something, just lock your device. I mean, if you're using public devices, which I don't think a lot of people do today, but if you do, just remember to log out of them properly, just to ensure that nothing's left behind. Using strong passwords. we use something called Password Boss here, and that's what gets us a nice strong password, and then having a good backup of your files, which I know ramsac offer one, which is really, really good, because I think it's Skykick, isn't it? So
Yeah, so why? So everything's in the cloud, and lots of people think, well, it's all in the cloud, so it's fine. It's
yeah.
it's gone are the days where we stick a tape in a backup drive. Why would I want somebody else to back up my SharePoint site? Why would that be important?
Because it's never a bad thing to have more backups in place. I mean, Microsoft give you a backup, but it's not as strong as the one that we can also do as well. So I would always say you should backup, and backup, just to make sure your data is always captured. Um, Servers can go down, online server, like, because SharePoint's moved from on-prem to obviously the cloud. Cloud could go down one day. At least you've got a backup of it as well. If your data has been hacked as well, these things can happen. Data breach is backed up to a last previous version, which is fine. You can restore that backup. So I've always said you should back it up, regardless if it's cloud or on-prem. It does not matter. You should always have a backup.
Yeah, and we talk about air gapping these days, don't we? In the
Yeah,
olden days of tape backup, everybody was very good at going, well, I've taken the tape out of the tape drive in the morning. I know I've got to pop that in my car and take it home at night because I want a physical gap between the live data and the data that I've got backed up in case there's a fire or whatever. But I think the modern day equivalent of that is a sort of a cloud backup that really requires no interaction on a day-to-day basis, but it's backed up somewhere other than Microsoft. So
yeah,
that if there is a problem with that Microsoft tenant, and if you did have, say, an encryption virus that locked it all down, you've got an independent third party with an air gap between live data and backed up data. And if people are interested in that kind of thing, I mean, we're talking, sort of a couple of pounds per user per month kind of thing, aren't we, to have a complete backup of
yeah.
not only SharePoint actually, but OneDrive and Teams and all that kind of good stuff as well. Brilliant. Thank you. So there you go. I just mentioned OneDrive. I know one of the things that some people sort of turn their nose up at about SharePoint is the ease at which they can browse files, particularly if they're offline, maybe they're working on a train or whatever it might be, how they can attach files to emails. And people, I think people kind of still tarnish SharePoint with its predecessor, kind of old SharePoint, which was quite clumsy. But there are ways, aren't there, to do things with OneDrive, etc., so that we don't have those same issues of how we synchronize data. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Adil?
Yeah, so OneDrive was introduced by Microsoft. It's a two-part thing, and I don't mean to confuse anyone on the call today. So if I do, then forgive me for that. But you've got one part where is essentially your documents. So it replaces that My Documents bit, is your personal file store. But it could also be used as a sync engine tool with SharePoint, and that allows people to have that view and look and feel of what a traditional server used to be. So if I just quickly give you a little demonstration. So as you can see, I've got a breakdown of two areas here on the left. So OneDrive, where it says ramsac limited, that's my personal OneDrive, where all my personal data is. And then where it just says ramsac limited with this little building, that means SharePoint. So this is now synced down from SharePoint, and it gives me that quick, easy file type of exploration in the file explorer view, which was typical server view. It has its benefits. Benefit of doing it this way is you can attach an email straight from SharePoint, attach a file straight from here into etc. etc. Whereas if you didn't have it synced down, you'd have to go to SharePoint, save a copy, and then attach it. So this way you don't need to do that. Another thing is you can work collaboratively online together, even though you can do that in the browser view as well, but you can do it from here, and you can have up to, I think Microsoft say 99 people or something like that, but we've never tested it, of course. You can multiple collaboration, and I think that the other best thing about it is it's pretty much just gives people that feel of nothing's changed for them if when they move. So you'll do a SharePoint move, you'll sync this all down for them, syncing only what you need though. And then yeah, it gives people that look and feel of, yeah, I'm continue working as I did 15 years ago, etc.
So this is synchronous. So this is a live sort
Yeah,
of share. So these files are it's just a different skin on it, really, isn't it? But you synced copy locally, so I can work offline, and then it will sort of
yeah,
it will synchronize it back when I reconnect.
yeah.
And you made a subtle but important point there about only what you need. You don't want to have people synchronizing your entire SharePoint site, because I think their laptops are probably going to have smaller hard drives than
Yeah.
probably the entire SharePoint estate, right?
Yeah, so you'll crash. It would definitely crash. And I would say 99% of the issues that people have with OneDrive and I go and fix is because on that left-hand column, you can see I have 1, but some people have like 27. And then what that's doing is it's constantly in use looking for a change. And when a change has happened, it's constantly then trying to sync it and give you the latest version. Ultimately, as you just said, it can't handle it. So, I mean, me as a SharePoint guy as well within the organization, I've only synced down one area from our whole SharePoint. And that's literally just our client drive because, yeah, no explanation needed there. But yeah, that's me. And but you've got some people out there that they'll just sync everything, and I'm just like, please don't do it. Only sync the things that you need, and that's it. You'll have a nice experience then.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, I mean, one of the advantages, we just talked about sort of different sort of file versions. One of the things I love about SharePoint is that ability to go back to a previous version of something as well. I think we've all done that thing where you open like the letterhead template, for example, and you think you've done a save as before you start writing all your data on it, and then suddenly realize that, oh gosh, I'm editing the whole company's document here. But we can go back to sort of previous versions really quickly within Word, can't we?
Yeah, you can. So you can literally in Word and in SharePoint as well. So you've got the option to go back to version history and it will store as many versions as it possibly can. So you can always go back to a version. I like it too in the sense of if a document changed, you can see what changed from that document. So what was previously, etc. Works well with your type of files. For example, policies and procedures, things if policies change. So you can see what's changed. But yeah, it gives the end user that comfort zone of knowing, phew, if something's changed, I can always go back to a version and it'll save the day for me.
And that's really easy within a document library in SharePoint. It's pretty much as simple as kind of right clicking and loading versions, isn't it? And you can sort of see the time and date of the previous. I don't know whether I didn't hear you up to talk about that, so that's probably going to be unfair to ask you to quickly find. But it is literally a case of going into the document library. You can pretty much right click on it. You can see a version history, which is lovely, and you could just restore it to how it looked an hour ago or how it looked yesterday, or
I'll
which
try and
is
find one.
which is brilliant. Don't worry too much. Don't worry too much. So we're doing well for time. I said we'd try and finish in 45 minutes, and we're about 40 minutes in. So I'm keen to take some questions as well. But I just wanted to talk about training first of all. So I know that you're. Oh, I'm sorry. I think we've got somebody's taking themselves off mute. Oh, there you go. There you go. We're saved. I know you're really passionate about training. What's your view on the best way to approach sort of SharePoint training for people? Do they need training?
Yes.
Okay.
They need training, and I think that there's no point in doing what everybody sees today, this great intranet, look and feel, etc., etc. It looks amazing. There's no point going through all this without training the users on it. I think if users are not aware of it, if they don't know what the best practices are, this will just completely go wrong very, very quickly. And I think that one thing that I take a lot of pride in as well is the fact that what the users are seeing today, or what the clients are seeing today, or the viewers, I should say, what they're seeing today is they probably think I've kept this up to date, which is that's not the truth. I built it, yes, but it's been updated by people like Dan and Louise and Kaylee, etc. All of our internal people. What they do is I've trained them very well, I think, and I hope I have, and they keep this all up to date with the news posts and the links and etc and everything like that, and it just makes my life easy from an admin point of view. And I think that's advantage number one from an admin. If you can train internal members of staff to act as your internal champions, it saves you a lot of headache and a lot of time. It just means that you focus on when things break, or if you need to go through a revamp, which is what we did for the people hub, etc. That's the only point of view when you need to get involved. But otherwise, I think that training is very, very important. And I think there's no point in going through all of this if you overlook your user training.
And I think we talk about, I know when you're starting a project like the hub with a client, you will run a sort of an art of the possible workshop, won't you? And you'll show what's possible, because we're just the IT guys, right? And we don't know exactly how every organization wants to work and wants to interact. And I think the more you show people what's possible, actually the ideas then come from within the organization, don't they? So it'll be the head of marketing will sit there and go, wow, well, if we could do that, we could also do that that and that. And you know, as you say, Adil, we absolutely don't want to be using you to be posting news hub posts and stuff like that, because that would be a backlog, because you'd be busy on client work and we'd be not communicating internally. So having people internally, you know, everybody has somebody in their team that knows how to post and I think, I mean, we probably had the hub for about 3 years now, 2.5, 3 years, something like that. And it was only quite recently that we had to bring you back in, because I think we'd seen it was the People Hub, actually, wasn't it, where we said, actually, we've now added so much content to it that the structure that we had when we launched the People Hub doesn't work anymore for
It's
us.
outgrown.
It got a bit cumbersome, and it was only that we needed to bring you back in and say, we've got an idea now of what we want, but this is a bit creative. Can you do it? Other than that, we're pretty self-sufficient as an internal team. That's not because we're an IT business, because the people that you just mentioned would not consider themselves as techies. You know, I think anybody internally can post these news posts, can create new folder structures, can check share permissions, and or just with a call to first line support can do the same. So I think having some like product champions on each team, I guess we would call them,
I mean,
has been really successful.
You give them whatever name. I just say champion users, and you don't need to have many, but yeah, and just get them trained up, and literally just saves a lot of time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Adil. I think that's kind of covered. Have we missed anything? Was there anything else you wanted to point out? I know we've got a couple of questions that I'm going to come to now. Anything else you wanted to sort of beat the drum for?
No, not really. I think we've touched base on everything, and I think the question, I always look forward to questions, to be honest. So let's get to the questions.
Yeah, so we've had a couple of questions. If people want to raise any more, then please do. So Paul has asked, how do you share with a third party if you've set to share internally only?
That's where we'll have to go through your configuration settings and change them. So there's a few different options we can go through, but we could sit down, go through the different options, and then just tinker around with the settings. And then once you're comfortable with that particular setting, then we can go back, look through your list of sites, lock the other sites down, which should be internal only, and just open up the ones that you're quite happy for external. And that's how we can manage it.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, isn't it? Because our recommendation would always be that the core site isn't set to share externally, and you create external shares only for things that you want. And that just saves that accidental oversharing, because you almost share it kind of works on a sort of a grandfather, father, son right of folders. So if you share the grandfather folder, you've shared everything else in it. So there's a danger that users internally are oversharing, and before you know it, you've shared, you know, finance and HR vault documents and all that kind of stuff. So I think, Paul, our answer would be that the core site is set to be internal, and then we create a share like we've done with our client drive. I still call it a drive. I grew up on servers. Our client folder. We create shareable resources, which is where you have your collaboration space. So hopefully that answers your question, Paul. A question from Gemma: with regards to having team sites, how do you manage cross-departmental access to certain folders that different teams need to use? For example, finance documents that the data team also need access to.
That's a really good question, and I get asked that question quite a lot during our project phase. So what we'll do with that one is, as I touched on earlier as well, we create different permission security groups for each department, and you're literally just layering it. So for example, if we've got one area, like you said, you just put the finance team as access level and another data control team. You give data team access as well, and you can give them different rights. So one team may need actual edit and full control rights, while the other team just need to view the files and not be able to touch, edit, delete, download, etc. You can set that permission level to that as well, and that's how you'd manage the crossway of permissions. And then me personally, I like to create a permission matrix for this, so then you'll always have a live file knowing who has access to what and what level of access that they have as well.
And I think a really good example of how that, hopefully that helps, Gemma. I think a really good example of how I've seen that work in practice for us is HR documents. So you created for us. So I'm a department director. I have 2 or 3 teams within my directorate, and within those teams we might have supervisors that manage parts of the team. So you set it up for me so I can see all staff file folders within my department,
Yeah.
And then Matt, for example, who's head of one of the teams within my department, he can see everything within his team.
Yeah.
And then Frank, that reports to Matt, can only see the people that report to Frank. So
Him.
it kind of
Yeah.
works that because GDPR kind of says we should only have access to stuff that we legitimately need access to, right? So Matt can see the folders of everyone that reports to him and the people that report to the people that report to him. So it kind of works like a cascade umbrella, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
and you've been able to manage that really well. Um, a question from Russell, who I know works in a school environment. So
Okay.
sharing externally for education is a bit of a minefield, as parents may not have personal Office 365 accounts, but might have business accounts. We've set up an external SharePoint where we only share with parents. Would you set this up differently for data protection?
No, the only thing I think that's a very good approach to what you've done. I think the only thing I would do is probably retention labels on top of it, security sensitivity labels, just to ensure that that data is kept for a certain number of years, especially being in education. So, I mean, I didn't touch on it, but I used to work for DFE, and I know that a lot of files you need to hold for like 4 years, 3 years. So just to keep a tag on that will keep that extra layer of protection to make sure you're GDPR compliant. Otherwise, I think that's a good way of how you set it up
So
within a
what is a
separate site.
retention? Tell us a bit about what is a retention label, Adil.
Yes,
What does that enable us to do?
so sensitivity labels, you can attach them to a document library in your files and folders. And what it essentially means is that file cannot be accidentally deleted or removed from the system for 3, 4 years, 5 years, however long you need to set it for, unless you physically remove the label. The reason behind it is because, as you just touched on with GDPR, certain personal files for, patients, etc., stuff like that, need to only be held for a certain number of years. So when it comes to its potential um, retention period, you'll get alerted by it that these sets of files are coming up to its 3-year retention. Please view them. If you need to extend that period, great. If you need to destroy those files, you need to destroy those files to keep yourself GDPR compliant. And if there's someone who accidentally deletes something, it won't delete. So it'll protect that file. Even though if it does delete, we've got backups and recycle bin and we can restore it. But again, it's another level of security.
Brilliant. So we can actually tag
Yeah.
at a document level or at a folder level, or is that both?
Both. So you can do a document library level, and the folder will inherit what's at the document library level.
So in the library, in the folder, or an individual document, we can say our company policy is. So in the case of a school, for example, I'd imagine that you might have a load of files that need to be deleted at the end of a school year when a year group moves on.
Yeah.
So rather than having to remember to do that manually,
Yeah, you
we
just
could
set a
put
retention.
sensitivity tags that say this is a document that has to be kept for 7 years, but shouldn't be kept for 7 years and 1 day because our data protection policy says we'll
Yeah.
destroy documents after a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you. I can't see any more questions in the chat. No, I think we've covered, unless there's any final questions that people want to raise.
I think we did
A
a very
question
good.
from Pete. Can you set a trusted locations in SharePoint folders to make it easier to open files with links to other files?
It's a good question. I need to take that one away.
Okay.
I've not done that before, so I need to take that one away to see if it's possible or not.
Brilliant. I know who that question's come from, Pete. We won't forget you. We'll come back to you on that. I don't think there are any other questions in here. Well, thank you, Adil. It's been great to chat to you. We're not actually sat in the same office. You're up in the Midlands. I'm down in the Guildford office today, so it's nice to actually see you today. Thanks for joining me for today's webinar. We do have a recording of the webinar. Somebody's just asked, how do we get access to Adil? Well, by all means, if you want some time with Adil, then if you're an existing client, then by all means speak to your ramsac relationship manager. If not, I'm just going to put my email address in the chat as well. We are going to follow up with a quick survey as well, which will have a selection box if you wanted to have some time with Adil. A quick plug. Adil does offer a SharePoint health check where he'll come in and there's a sort of a number, like a multi-point check so if you're already using SharePoint and you're concerned about the security, the configuration, or the performance settings, Adil has a SharePoint health check process that he goes through. We are offering that with a 50% discount for people that have joined the call here today. Again, there'll be some information about that that's emailed to you after today's call. We'll share a recording to this call as well if you wanted to listen to me and Adil chatting again, or if you wanted to share this with a colleague. If you're not in SharePoint, but you want to get there and you want some help getting that process up and running, then Adil is very happy to spend some time with you. Again, normally we factor in a call initially just to kind of explore what you're looking to achieve, so we can give you some ideas, and then Adil's happy to come and spend some time with you running some workshops, and then, you know, ultimately whether that's a project you're going to deliver yourself or whether you want us and Adil and the team here to be building and developing for you. So we'll send some information in the sort of post-call follow-up along with the recording. Look out for the survey in your inbox shortly, please. It's always good to get your feedback, but I hope today's been really useful for you. Thanks, Adil, for your time. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Thank you very much. Have a great
Thank you,
morning.
everyone. Thank you.